This is a psalm of praise, and also the last part is more of a prayer. From verse 11 onwards, it's prayer, but the initial part is more of a praise and a proclamation. And the interesting thing about this psalm is if you read from verse 13 to 17, and if you go to Psalm 70, you will see the same verses. So it's exactly similar. You all know I live in Cumming, and if I have to go to the airport, I have to hop on Highway 400, right? State Route 400. And I keep going, and it all changes to interstate, and then I get off at the exit, right? 400 becomes 85 and 75, the interstates when you reach the downtown, and then you take the exit there. So whenever, if somebody asks me, okay, in Cumming, how do you go to airport? I will say, just hop on the State Route 400, right? But for a person who lives in the downtown, what would you say? Hop on 85 or hop on the interstate and get out on this exit. Whenever we look at the Old Testament, and a lot of psalms are more messianic. It is a prophetic, psalm which actually is pointing to Christ. And most of the NT writers read psalms in the light of fulfillment related to Jesus Christ. So when they were reading, they were still seeing Highway 400, but it was all pointing to an interstate, which is the redemption story that God had, and they did not understand at that point. So as I said, the people in Atlanta would say, okay, this is Interstate 85, but the people in Cumming would say, no. We have to get on 400 to reach the airport. But people in Atlanta would say, no, it becomes interstate. Basically, you have to get to the interstate. That's why you're hoping on this. And when you look at the Old Testament, when David was probably writing this, he was writing about himself. God delivered him, and David is looking at into his life, and he may not be aware of everything that was written. But the divine author of the Word of God and the New Testament authors, when they look back, they see how the plan of God was working out. And that's why when we come to 6, 7, and 8 verses, this is exactly the verse that is used in Hebrews 10 when it talks about Jesus. Here, in the context of David is basically saying, God, you delivered me from, he doesn't say what, but he delivered him, maybe from the war, maybe from some persecution or pestilence. And he says, I will proclaim this to everybody because you have set my feet on the rock. I want to proclaim this. You can see that in verse 3. You can see that end of verse 5. You can see in 9 and 10. Everywhere he is proclaiming this praise. And when it comes to verse 6 and 7 and 8, he's saying, sacrifice and offering you have not delighted, but you have given me an open ear. In your translation, it could also be ears you have dug for me. What is David saying here? Lord, I want to proclaim to you what you have done, but I also wanted to come and give you all these offerings that I could give in response as a gratefulness to you. And then he remembers what Samuel told Saul at that time. Obedience is better than sacrifice. And he is basically saying, I want to come and give my life instead. I will commit myself to you. And that's what it means for David in this context. But we see in Hebrews 10, the author is saying this is what something that Jesus actually spoke about. Let's turn to Hebrews 10. Hebrews 10, and if I read from verse 5, consequently, when Christ came into the world, he said, who said? Jesus said this verse, and there you can see exactly the same verses from Psalms 40. And in verse 8, it again reads, when he said above, you have neither desired nor taken pleasure in sacrifices and offerings, and burnt offerings and sin offerings. These are offered according to the law. Then he added, behold, I have come to do your will. He does away with the first in order to establish the second. And by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. What you see there is an exact explanation of those three verses that David wrote in his life in the light of Christ, in the light of the fulfillment of Christ. I want to just think about one point that Hebrews chapter 10 is talking about Christ here. If you read the beginning of Hebrews 10 and verse 1 and 1 to 3, it talks about the offerings that the Old Testament people used to do. They had to offer sacrifices, and every year the priest had to do the sacrifice. And it says in verse 2, otherwise would they not have ceased, verse 1, for since the law has but a shadow of the good things to come, instead of the true form of these realities, it can never, by the same sacrifice that are continually offered every year, make perfect those who draw near. It could not make those people who came with the sacrifices perfect. Not only that, in second verse, otherwise they would not have ceased to be offered, since the worshippers, having once been cleansed, would no longer have any consciousness of sins. They were not perfect. Every time they came here, they were reminded of the sins. In verse 3 it says, but in this sacrifice there is a reminder of sins every year, for it is impossible for the blood of bulls and goats to take away sins. What is the author trying to say here? These people came and offered the sacrifice. They did the atonement every year. They had to do this. But every year when they were doing this, they were not freed from the consciousness of sins. Every time they were doing this, this is always a reminder of these sins. I think in America, one of the dreams is you buy a home and you pay it off. Right? You buy $1 million home or 500,000 home, and you have a loan for 30 years. And for those 30 years, every month beginning, you are reminded, you owe me 500,000, or you owe me $1 million, and you are paying it every year. Like, this is nothing, right? You are such a big amount of loan, and you're paying a little bit, and you have this burden for these 30 years and 45 years or 15 years, and you're doing it, and you're trying to pay it off. And we work, very hard, pay it off, and the last 10 years we live, peacefully, and then we die, right? That's more of a American life. This is very similar to that. The debt that we have to pay for our sins is so great. And when they were doing all this, every year they're coming and getting reminded of this debt that they have to pay. But what did Jesus do at the cross? He came, he paid it completely, and said, now you're not paying for the sins, but you are enjoying the result of what Jesus has done. We are forgiven. And what was the problem before? They were not perfect. Now we are perfected positionally before God, so that we can come and access Him and worship Him. And that is the greatest thing that God has given us. It is not million. It could be the $1 trillion, and you are paying like 50 cents every time they did the sacrifice. It was not enough. And if we try to do this by the sake of good works and everything, it is very insignificant, because He is a holy God. He is so great. His demand is so high. His standard is so high that we cannot pay it back, but we can only say, Lord, I trust in your sacrifice because you paid it. And now I am perfected because of what you have done. I want to read 2 verses because it's so beautiful here in this chapter, Hebrews 10, verse 10. And by that will we have been sanctified through the offering of the body of Jesus Christ once for all. We have been sanctified by the body of Jesus Christ once for all. Read verse 14. For by a single offering He has perfected for all time those who are being sanctified. We are perfected forever in the presence of God because of the sacrifice of Christ, because He paid it off. Because He paid it off. We are a debtor to the graces we were singing today. Jesus paid it all. And now we are enjoying the salvation, and that's why we are here. Let's turn back to Psalms 40 and verse 16. But may all who seek you rejoice and be glad in you. May those who love your salvation say continually, great is the Lord. Those who love this salvation can only say continually, oh, great are you, Lord. Oh, great is your work. And that's why we come together. As I said, this is a psalm where David is saying in verse 3, he put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. Verse 5, the last part, I will proclaim and tell of them, that they are more than can be told. In 9 and 10, he's talking about telling this to the congregation. Let me tell you, this is the act of worship, because David was delivered. He is loving the salvation that God has given, so he cannot just keep silent, but he comes and continually says, great is the Lord. When we look to the cross, this is what we should be responding with. Great are you, Lord. Great is your work. And when we come together, we are celebrating this. We are singing about the cross so that we are reminded and we are celebrating, oh God, you did this. And we are now free, and that is why we are singing. I was also thinking, David had a new song in his mouth in verse 40, verse 3rd in Psalms 40. He put a new song in my mouth, a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear and put their trust in the Lord. The Lord has done a lot of work in addition to this great salvation in our lives, and we need to remember that. We need to share that for the praise of His glory. But the greatest song we can ever sing is the song of the gospel, that what Christ has done. And when we sing this song, when we tell others, this is the power of God for salvation for others. And that is what that's what the psalmist is saying. I will keep on proclaiming. And for us, we will tell the greatest sacrifice, the greatest thing that God has done for us, that is the salvation. And when we come together, when we are reminded of this, when we sing to each other, we are celebrating the salvation. We are proclaiming the salvation. And let our worship be a reminder of what God has done. And in response, we are saying, great are you, Lord. And we are committing ourselves to Him because He has given us everything and we want to give it back to Him. May God bless you with these words.
Church, it's the time for testimony and praise reports or prayer requests. So those who are in the sanctuary, they can take time first, and after that, those who are worshiping online, they can testify.